I don't know that I've ever said that I read myself into the church. Now, I will be the first to admit there was at least one really key text, but it wasn't about so much the intellectual argument of that text. The intellectual arguments came shortly thereafter, where I started to do a lot of reading. But I think for me there was a combination of a truth of something that I would read, coupled with an experience of beauty. Particularly, I've mentioned the Cathedral Basilica in St. Louis is one of my favorite, places because of the impact that it had on my conversion. And then people who exhibit the life that I say I want, or provide a good example of virtue for me. So I think, as I've talked about it, and I've even heard people say, I read myself into the church, or somebody says about another person, oh, they read themselves into the church. I would, in intimate moments or candid moments, I would probably tell them, and I have told them, it's never just intellectual. Even if somebody's head leads them, again, in my own story, my head led the way because I could check the boxes of things that were true, but conversion only comes about fully from our will. And so reading oneself to the door of the church, it might be true that happened, but I would challenge someone to really go back and pray and meditate on what's going on along the way, because you're going to notice that the intellectual and the moral are really like walking or running in some cases, right? You can't walk with one leg. There's always, even if you're limping with the other leg, at least for a little period of time, the other leg's working, right? And our human makeup is such that our will is always working in tandem with our intellect. It's not my intellect, it's not my will. Well, it is my intellect and my will that are eventually working, but it's the movement of grace that first even causes me desire to pick up a book and read. That's the teaching of the church, that grace always moves first. It's one of the things that I deal with in my book very clearly at the front. We think oftentimes that our conversion, we're moving this along, but we really have to realize that it's the movement of grace in our lives first that makes us want to be better, and that finally those things working together bring us to an experience of beauty that really is where we can turn our lives to something great. I certainly do think that, if people are not aware of the movement of grace first, that it can very much devolve into, a situation like I encountered when I was in graduate school at a big secular university with a lot of people who were, even anti-religion or anti-church, and I'm trying to argue them into the church. I remember sitting with another young man making all the apologetical arguments, and he looks at me and he says, "Yep, you're right." And not a thing after that. It didn't matter, because and this is where I was too. I had won the argument, but I hadn't won the heart, right? And I had to come to that harsh realization that our Lord is far more about winning hearts than he is about winning arguments. And this is hard for a guy who, my wife tells me all the time I should have been a lawyer because I like to argue, and, I like to win arguments. I like to be right. But it's not about the argument. It's about the heart. And, I have a hard time keeping that in mind a lot of days too. So.